Alrighty, welcome back everybody to the 22nd week of our Tech Bytes JavaScript session. So good to see you guys are back with us. As always, guys, we are making so much progress, and this week is going to be no different. If you're coming back from our web development course, welcome back to the 13th week of our web development course. As always, love seeing you guys here. Thanks for coming out, guys. Hopefully you guys are having a good day, and without any further ado, let's get to it. All right, if you guys don't already know who I am, guys, my name is Rayan Siddiqui. I am a senior at James B. Conant High School. Love to program, made multiple apps for the App Store, made a dozen different websites. I love making cool products off to the side as well, and really like making content, whether that be on a sports talk show some of my friends and I run called Buzzer to Buzzer on YouTube, or writing some articles for the internet, or making some of my own tech YouTube videos. All that can be found on my website at rayansiddiqui.com. All right, guys, so let's get down to today's agenda. That being that, firstly, we're going to get started with our daily fun fact. Then we're going to head on over to talking about just recapping what we have covered over the past couple of weeks about our Hangman project, go over the code which we added last week, and then we are going to discuss what we're going to be coding this week, and then we're going to get towards actually coding the concept. So our first item on the agenda, quick reminder, guys, remember our YouTube channel videos are available on the Schomburg library. So all these recorded sessions, a couple of questions have been asked in the past about where can I find these. Super simple. Head on over to YouTube, the app or website, whatever you prefer. Search the Schomburg library, and there is a playlist called Tech Bytes where you can find months and multiple hours worth of content. So if you want to go back, look over some old concepts, whatever the case might be, you can visit the YouTube channel, or you can head on over to our Google Classroom where there is a lot more material posted as well. All right, so now let's get towards our JavaScript, our cool JavaScript fun fact of the day. That being that we can use the programming language of JavaScript to create a game involving artificial intelligence. Okay, let's backtrack and dissect the statement like we always do. So we're saying the language which we are studying and making projects with, JavaScript, can be used to make games which involve machine learning and artificial intelligence. So like an example down here, we got a game, looks like the car is going to drive autonomously, meaning the car is going to drive by itself in this video game. And the way in which that is possible is that we can use the language of JavaScript. Well, that's a bit interesting because we've talked about a lot of machine learning and a lot of artificial intelligence concepts involving multiple machine learning algorithms in our Hack Central program. But if you recall, we've mostly done all of those algorithms, actually all of those algorithms, in the language of Python. We've never really talked about how we can implement machine learning with JavaScript. How can we do stuff through which we can teach the computer? We've always talked about how Python is an amazing language for getting that data, analyzing that data, and we haven't placed that much emphasis of that same category with JavaScript. You know, we've talked about JavaScript being a nice language to make games like we do a lot of times for making websites, making web pages, animations, all that cool type of stuff. But today, a cool point we're trying to bring up is that JavaScript also has some machine learning applications. Now, how is that possible? Well, firstly, it encompasses using what we already know. We're using that HTML for the structure, using that CSS to make our web page look nice, and the core, the JavaScript, you know, behind the game, the functionality. But then, say going back to that autonomous car, the self-driving car game, we use another JavaScript framework called TensorFlow. Now, if that name rings a bell, you're probably thinking of Hack Central because we use this a ton in our Hack Central program. Whenever we're talking about any machine learning algorithm, whether it be linear regression, we're talking about KNNs, SVMs, whatever the case might be, we're always using TensorFlow with Python, and that's usually the case. And similarly, there is a TensorFlow framework for JavaScript. And using that framework, we can train our game on certain weights and biases, entering certain inputs, certain labels and features. If you're interested in what any of these terms mean, I go a lot more into depth in our Hack Central program. All these previous Hack Central recordings can be found on the YouTube channel as well. But using that framework, guys, we can train games like that car driving game so that a computer can autonomously drive that car, navigate its way through different obstacles, through different stoplights, whatever the case might be. And it's going to show that although Python is probably a bit more preferred language for doing that type of thing, we can certainly do some machine learning type of projects with the language of JavaScript as well. You've actually even probably seen this in play, this framework called TensorFlow.js. And if, in fact, if I open up a quick example, which is a pretty famous one I think you'll know of, let's see if I can find it. There was a couple of years ago, the company Google came out with a website called QuickDraw. And this website actually uses some TensorFlow.js, that JavaScript framework. And essentially, this is a bit more advanced. It's talking about some image classification. But essentially, if I draw whatever I want to draw, essentially the computer will guess it. So if I draw...
Oh, I know. It's zigzag.
See right there. So I was not expecting that. Looks like they got a voice output feature too. But essentially, using that TensorFlow.js framework, guys, this website is built upon that by Google. So if I do another one, draw a pillow.
I see banana. Oh, I know. It's pillow.
Exactly, right? So a little sneak peek there of how we can use that TensorFlow framework. But the main point which I wanted to get across this week was that, sure, it's cool to have some other applications of machine learning. But the main point is that what I can do in one language is most likely applicable. I can probably do that same thing in another language. Is it going to be a bit different? Do other languages, like if I want to make a website, would I much rather make it in JavaScript? 100%, because making it in Python, it's a bit more complicated, a lot more work to say the least. JavaScript is made specifically for that. But the cool thing to know in the back of our minds is that if need be, we can certainly replicate a certain concept in another programming language. And that concept today just happened to be making some cool things with machine learning. If any of this does interest you guys, I 100% recommend you guys to attend our Hack Central program every the second Monday of every month. So it should be coming up in a couple of weeks. But if you're interested in some of the older ones, you can certainly find them on our YouTube channel. Alrighty, so now let's get down to our project, which we started last week. That being the Hangman project. Now, guys, this is a project which we have been working on since last week. We started actually getting into the code and haven't, although made that much of a lot of code, we've certainly been going over some concept. And guys, the basic idea of the game is that it is basically a Hangman game. If you've never played it, you got a little stick figure, right? You're one person, in this case, with what we're making, the computer is going to have a word which they randomly choose. That's the part we worked on last week. And then we have to guess the word. So it's essentially, it's a guessing the word game with us inputting some letters as the user. The core concepts, guys, once again, which we will be using involve variables, functions, loops, parameters, logic, if-else statements, and also a lot of substringing. And today, actually, we will be diving into some of that substringing. So to go over last week's code, in case you were not here, just get a quick refresher, make sure we are all on the same page. Last week, guys, we went over how the game was played. We discussed our game format, and that's what we spent a lot of time on. We made the backbone of our game, a lot of work on our HTML, making the paragraph tags, making the buttons, the text field, making it look a bit nice, not with the CSS, but still making it so that we can use it in the future. And then we started coding. So on top of that HTML, we performed our first JavaScript concept, that being choosing a random word from an array. So you probably know the game Hangman, that there's a word which somebody's chosen, and the other person's objective is to guess that word, guessing one letter at a time usually, right? Well, last week we worked on the idea of choosing a random word. So I believe we had a array of random sports, and we programmed it so that we used one random sport from that array, and that's going to be the word which we're going to be guessing as the user. All right, so now what will we be doing this week? Well, we're going to keep on building upon that concept. Last week we got the computer side handled with the selection of the word. This week we're going to flip-flop and go towards the user side. And specifically, we're going to be working on so that the user can input a letter, any letter, which is through the letter A through Z, any of the 26 letters in the alphabet. And once the user inputs a letter, we want to show them, a somewhat corresponding number of spaces which the word has. And going back to the side of the computer, on the computer side, we're going to show the right number of spaces which a word has. So if you're probably playing a hangman, you got that little stick figure drawing in the top left, whatever you use to keep in track, right? And then you got a word which somebody selected. So say the word is cat, we should see 3 separate underscores, aka 3 separate spaces, signifying that there are 3 letters in that word. Similarly, if we got a word like basketball, we should see that there are 4, 6, 8, there should be 10 different underscores representing that there are 10 different letters which still need to be guessed correctly, right? So this week, that's going to be what we're going to be focusing on. This is going to be taking a large portion of our class because although it's pretty easy to say, hey, I got the word Bob, 3 letters, go. Pretty easy for me to say, but actually coding that concept is a bit more complex. And in fact, the way we will be accomplishing and coding this concept will be through using the concept of substring. And more specifically, guys, we've talked about substring a bunch in our old JavaScript curriculum courses. We've talked about the importance, how we are able to extract a certain letters from a word. So like the word, say, will, I can extract the letters I and L using substring. And today, we will be comparing the letters the user has inputted to the word the user has selected. And that's going to be using the concept of substring in order to display the word which the user has entered. So guys, without any further ado, how about we actually get towards coding that concept of displaying the correct number of spaces on our JS Fiddle website. Give everybody a couple of minutes to get on the website. As always, the link will be in the chat as well, and you can find our code in our Google Classroom as well. Give everybody a couple minutes and we get started. All right. Is everybody on the website? Everybody good? Give a minute more. All right. All right, guys. So as we get on to our coding platform of JS Fiddle, we can see that we made a lot of progress last week, especially with the actual HTML part, displaying our game some nice instructions. We got our text field. We got a tag holding the number of tries and attempts we have made. And also, the JavaScript is where it is at, right? Last week, this is what we were working on a lot. Specifically, guys, we had an array of words, and then we were generating a random word to be selected. And the way we did that was using a library called math, right? And generating a random position. And whatever that random position was, we would select whatever word there was. So say this random position was the second position. Then we would select the 0, 1, 2, meaning the sport of baseball would be the word we are guessing. Because remember, in an array, it always starts at the index 0. So basketball is at the 0th index, football at the 1st, baseball at the 2nd, hockey at the 3rd, and soccer at the 4th. Does that mean that we have only 4 objects in our array? No, we still have 5 items, right? We got 5 sports, but the positioning always starts at the 0th index. In this case, basketball starts at 0. All right, guys. So how about we get towards actually adding some more concept today, that being specifically displaying the number of spaces which we have to guess at. And although even if we don't get to the actual comparison part today, the main idea is just to get that right displayment. And to do that, we're going to be using some for loops. So what I'm going to do firstly, guys, is that right now, if we go back up, we see that we have linked our submit guess button to our submit letter function. So I'm going to do is going to alert hello, make sure this function is being called whenever I hit submit. Oh, and I'm going to comment out this alert down here because we do not need to know what is being selected? That would be a bit counterintuitive, right? Knowing the word before the game starts. So hit run. Looks like that button is working correctly. So first things first, guys, we have the computer's officially selected a word. And remember, the computer is selecting a word before the game even starts. And the way that's possible is that through this body on load line of code. And this line of code, guys, is that this line of code allows us to run a certain function before our JavaScript is loaded. And in this case, we're calling this do stuff before game function, that's taking care of all the housekeeping tasks which need to be done. And one of those housekeeping tasks so far is selecting that random word. So guys, now how about we firstly get towards getting a letter from the user. So in order to do that right now, if I place the letter A, nothing's really going to happen, right? Because we're not doing anything with it. And how about firstly, we hold the user's response in a variable. So what I'm going to do is just clean up some of the code, change the positioning, place these global variables on top with the functions below. I'm going to make a new global variable called user current letter guess. So that equal to some empty quotation marks like such. You could call it whatever you want. This is just going to represent the user's current letter input. So for example, the letter I. Alrighty. And now we have to assign our variable with a value. So I'm going to do is paste that variable, set that equal to. So in order to get the value of that variable, we need to check we need to essentially grab whatever letter the user inputted into that text field. So the way I'm going to do that is, if you guessed it, a really long line of code, the document dot get element by ID, opening close parentheses, add those quotation marks, whatever ID you assigned to your text field. In my case, it is the user guess text field. Paste that in, and then dot value, like such. As you guys are catching up, what I'm going to do is just print out whatever the user guessed into our console, make sure that is working correctly. Say the letter A is inputted, go to the console, we see the letter A is being printed out. Give everybody a quick minute to catch up. Alrighty, so now that, guys, we are able to officially, enter a guess, how about we get towards actually displaying what word we're guessing at, right? So that is going to require a bit more logic. And if we are thinking about this in a more logical type of sense, right, in the logic phase right now, it would make sense for us to be able to see how many spaces we have, essentially how many letters we have to guess before we make our first guess, right? So like if I draw this out and put this in a more context, say we have our hangman right here. And how about actually, let me open the whiteboard. Give me one sec, guys. So say I got my hangman game right here, right? We got our hangman, whatever you're gonna draw on it. It wouldn't make sense for me to first guess a letter, then for the spaces to come out, right? It would make much more sense for us to have preloaded. So in a sense, like say me and Joe are playing a game of hangman, right? It would make more sense for, say, Joe's the person putting the word, for Joe to add the number of letters. So say he's doing the word library, so Library. It would make sense for him to draw those spaces out before I make my first guess. Well, similarly, that's something which we should keep in mind, meaning the code, in order to display the right number of spaces, would most likely go in that function which we're calling before our JavaScript is loaded, meaning in that onLoad function. So whatever we name that function, that is where we're going to be adding that type of logic. So open up our environment again. There we go. So using that mentality, I'm going to go back to our do stuff before game function, that general function which is going to take care of all our stuff before the game actually begins. And remember to abstract, guys, remember abstracting is a way to clean up our code, make our functions more reusable. What I'm going to do is make a function called function, how about display word spaces. And remember those opening close parentheses, add those opening closed squiggly brackets like such. And now, guys, here comes some of the logic which is going to be involved. For us to, how about actually before we get to the logic, have we created a area for us to display our word? Looks like we have not. So first things first, we got to make sure we add that. So what I'm going to do is copy this paragraph tag we made for our number of tries. And then actually what I'm going to do is go down here and change that paragraph tag to like a header 4, H4 tag, make it a bit more bigger. And this is going to represent, how about we call this our word display with our ID. And then we can just erase that text and say word and then colon. Actually, we can essentially leave a blank. How about that? And run it. So if I set it equal to letter A, we can see the letter A below. So now that we got an actual placeholder, an actual area for us to display it, now how about we get started? So guys, what I'm going to do is open up our whiteboard again to go through the logic of how we're going to be accomplishing that task. So how about we have an initial word? Our computer word, I'll say, is equal to, we'll do, how about we do the word bat? Pretty simple 3-letter word, right? Now, our final goal, I'll put that down here, final goal is to display, when our game begins, 3 underscores representing 3 separate letters have to be guessed by the user correctly in order for them to win. The way which we are going to be accomplishing this is using a type of loop. Does anybody have a guess of, will we be using a for loop or a while loop to tackle this idea? Remember, guys, if you are going to chat, you can always chat to me personally, so you don't have to share with other people. That is totally acceptable. Love hearing what you guys have to say. All right, and the correct answer is yes, we're going to be using a for loop in order to display the number of spaces. But why are we going to be using a for loop compared to a while loop? Well, a for loop is going to be easier, guys, because essentially the main idea, if I write this down, the way we're going to accomplish it is using that for loop, and we are going to be going over each letter of the word and displaying a corresponding space for that letter. And for loops are going to make our jobs very easier to accomplish this concept because we can simply run our for loop the number of letters long a word is. So if I write some pseudocode, a pseudocode is a fancy word for some fake code, which is like a general idea, just to lay our ground out, right? So how about we have a for loop which is going to be running for the length of our of the computer word. So in this length of bat, that would be 3 times, right? And then inside of our for loop, guys, we will need to be displaying, right? So we are probably going to need to have another variable we're going to have to create called display in order to hold the word, right? And this is going to be different than our computer word because the computer word is just the whole word which the user selected. The display is going to hold the whole word, a lot of tongue twister right there, with the correct number of spaces and any letters the user has guessed. So in that case, it could be bat with the correct letter A in the middle, right? Or it could just be 3 underscores like that. So keeping that in mind, we're going to need to manipulate our display variable in a way which we can get it to have 3 separate underscores. So we know that at the beginning of the game, the user's not made a guess. So that's our job, right? So the way we're going to accomplish that, guys, is just to display, our variable display is going to equal itself plus probably a nice space would look nice, plus an underscore. And this underscore, remember, is going to be representing that space in our letters. So if this looks a bit confusing, don't worry, we're going to be actually coding it and going through it. But that is the main idea, guys. We're going to run a for loop, which is going to essentially tell us how many spaces to have, and we'll display at the end. So gonna go back to our online website. There we go. So with all that in mind, let's get started. So we're gonna run a for loop for, I'm gonna do var x equals 0. X is less than the length of our computer word. And we know that computer word's already been chosen. So computer word dot length, colon, semicolon, and then x plus plus, because we're going to be increasing the value of our variable by 1 every time we run the for loop. With that done, guys, now remember, we got to create a separate variable to hold all of the mess which is going to be going on. All of those underscores, all the right letters which the user has guessed. So what I'm going to do is create a new global variable called var. We'll call it display. Let's call it something simple. Display, so that equal to empty quotation marks. We'll call it, how about whole display, to represent everything going on. So it's going to be responsible for holding all of the spaces and the correct letters the user has guessed. So using this global variable, guys, we're going to be manipulating this to make it so that the whole display variable equals itself plus a space in the middle. That would look nice, right? Like such, plus an underscore. And remember, that underscore is going to represent to us a blank letter which needs to be filled. All right, so with that out of the way, how about we test if this works? And if I run, nothing is really happening, right? Well, firstly, guys, we have to call this function inside of our do stuff before game function below. And the reason why we're going to be calling it below the assignment of our random word is that if we run it before, we're going to get an error because no computer word has been chosen. The computer word is chosen after we've gotten that random position, so that is why we're going to call it after we've got our random computer word. And that random word could be any of these 5 sports. And one more thing which we do have to add is that outside of the for loop, we have to actually display and manipulate our HTML using the document object model. So the way we're going to do that is, yep, if you guessed it, a long line of code, document dot get element by ID, opening close parentheses, add those opening close quotation marks, paste the name of your tag for your word display in the middle, like such, and then dot inner HTML, all in caps, is going to equal our whole display variable. Everybody, a minute to catch up. All right. So now, guys, if I hit run, how about we do something which, how about we log out what our word is and we can check if it correctly did it. So I'll do console.log computer word is, just so that we can compare if our word code is working correctly. So hit run. Let's see what the word is. The word is, computer word is basketball. So that's going to involve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we should see 10 corresponding spaces. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Voila. There we go, guys. We can see that we have correctly outputted the number of spaces, aka signifying to us how many letters we have to guess. And that takes care of our large concept for the day. And remember, guys, if you ever got lost throughout this process, this will be uploaded to our Google Classroom and be uploaded to YouTube. You can always go back and check out anything you have missed, or you can get my fresh copy in the classroom as well. All right, guys, so that wraps up our JavaScript web development course for this week, guys. Thank you so much for coming in. Next week, we'll be continuing to work on our Hangman project. More specifically, next week, we're going to start getting some more substringing type stuff done. More specifically, comparing the letter we enter with the computer's word letters and filling those blank spaces in with a correct letter. So say I have the word bat. If I guess the letter A, filling that middle blank space with the letter A. All that cool stuff, a lot more fun stuff to come about, guys. This Friday, remember, we got our team trivia going on at 3 p.m. if you want to come on and have a nice, relaxful start to your weekend. Love to have you guys here. But guys, stay safe, healthy, social distance. Stay safe, guys. Everything going on. And I'll catch you guys on next week, guys. Bye.